I salute you, not pray to you, salute you. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, translated by James Haughton Woods. So thus pains from subliminal impressions hindered the yogin only, who is like an eyeball, but not any other perceiver. But upon the other, not a yogin, who casts off the pain received time after time, which has been brought upon him by his own karma, and who receives the pain cast off time after time, and who is, as it were, permeated through and through from all sides with fluctuating mind stuff, complicated from the time without beginning with its subconscious impressions, and who, under the influence of undifferentiated consciousness of Vidya, conforms himself to the I substance out of the me substance, and with regard to these very things which are to be rejected upon him. Born again and again, the triple anguishes from these kinds of causes, both inner and outer, sweep down. It's just like the more of these things you accept, the more problematic lives, the more problematic of a life you have chosen. And you do that again and again and again, and in this life, really. This being so, the yogin, having seen himself and the whole multitude of creatures borne away by this stream of pain from time without beginning, seeks refuge in the focused insight, samyag darshana, the cause of dwindling of all pain, and by reason of the opposition of the fluctuations of the aspects, guna, the discriminating all is nothing but pain, the aspects, guna, of thinking substance in the form of brightness and of activity and of inertia, having become interdependent by aid given to each other, give rise to the present idea, either tranquil or cruel or infatuated, either one or the other, of just then these three aspects, because these changes, vrta, of the aspects, guna, are unstable. The mind stuff is rapid mutation. Thus, we have been told, the outer forms, which developed to a high degree, and the inner fluctuations, when developed to a higher degree, oppose each other. But the generic forms cooperate within those when developed to a high degree. Thus, since these aspects, guna, have presented ideas of pleasure and of pain, and of infatuation obtained by reliance of one aspect upon another, each sarv of them has the form of each of the others, but the distinction between them is due to their being either in a subordinate guna or in the dominant state. Therefore, to the discriminating, all is nothing but pain. So the seed out of which this huge aggregate of pain grows forth is undifferentiated consciousness. Avidya, and the reason for the failure of growth, abhava. In this avidya is focused insight, just as the system of medicine has four divisions: on disease, and on cause of disease, and on health, and on remedy. So this system also has four divisions: on the round of rebirth, and on the cause of the round of rebirth, and so on release, and on the way to release. Of these four, the round of rebirth, with its mass of pains, which is to be escaped, the conjunction of the primary cause, and the self is the cause of this which is to be escaped. Heya. The final destruction of the correlation is the escape. Hana. This means of escape is focused insight. In this focused insight, he who escapes, as he is in himself, can neither be accepted nor rejected. Heya. For if there be a rejection, Hana, that would involve the doctrine of an extermination of him who escapes. And if there be an acceptance, that would involve the doctrine that he has a cause. And by denying both the rejection and the acceptance, we have the doctrine that the seer, as he is in himself, is eternal. This is the focused insight. In order to account for this, he introduces the sutra after first having asked the question, how can this be accounted for? The sutra begins with the word mutation and ends with the word discriminating. The compound in the sutra is analyzed: mutation and anxiety and subliminal impression. These themselves are the pains. It is by these he describes the painfulness of the pleasure in objects of sense, insofar as mutations are painful, by saying, for every one this. Pleasure is surely impossible unless it be permeated by passion, for one cannot possibly say that one finds no happiness in a thing, and at the same time takes pleasure in it. Moreover, since pleasure leads to action, and action causes a latent deposit of merit and demerit, there is also a latent deposit of karma produced by the passion, because a thing which does not exist cannot be produced. Under these circumstances, a man experiencing pleasure and feeling attachment to it feels aversion towards the instruments of pain, but an aversion that is an intercepted state. Furthermore, being unable to prevent these instruments of pain, he becomes infatuated. Thus, there is also a latent deposit of karma, made by aversion and infatuation, and there is nothing contradictory in making infatuation, whose other name is misconception, the cause of a latent deposit of the karma of infatuation also. If he be asked, how can a man in love feel aversion or infatuation, since he is in love? Aversion and infatuation are not evidently existent, he replies. Well, people generally say in love, and they don't mean in love. They mean, status, wealth, the body. These feelings that will fade. But they say in love. Well, at least not in America. They generally don't mean they're in love. And in this sense, it has been said by us when explaining hindrances with intercepted states. In this way, merit and demerit have been shown as produced by sense activities of speech and mind, because a mental volition produced by passion, so that one wills, this must be done, is also not to be distinguished from the verbal form of the volition, insofar as it is equally desired. As they say, a volition with desire does not go beyond intended objects, which are expressed by words. He also shows a latent deposit of karma belonging to the body in the words, impossible unless one has killed. Remember that interview, the person's like, I hate to be the traditionalist of the room, but sometimes you have to kill someone. course, that sort of thing needs a lot of context, doesn't it? Hence, authors of the law books may say Manu 368, Vishnu 59:19. 5 kinds of slaughter are open to the householder. The objector says, this may be true, yet it is not fitting that a yogin should reject pleasure in objects of sense, which can be felt by anybody. For that would be running counter to experience. In reply, he says, it has been said, undifferentiated consciousness, avidya, is pleasure in an object of sense. By us, when showing, Book 2, verse 5, the undifferentiated consciousness is characterized by 4 kinds of misconceived ideas. The ancient sages, Vriddha, do not pay heed to anything merely at the first impressions. There is, of course, merely at the first impression, apatatas, an expression which anyone can feel, a pleasure which follows even after eating food mixed with sweet poison. But after a lapse of time, there is no pleasure. Or, well, if it's poison, opposite pleasure, you would think, unless you die unawares, but typically being poisoned doesn't work like that. And as such, it has been shown by the exalted Ishvara in the Gita 1838. After there has been contact of the sense organs with objects, that pleasure which is at the beginning like nectar, and in the course of time like poison, is known to be full of rajas. He raises a doubt by saying, which, with enjoyments, the objector says, we do not accede to the statement that pleasure is the joy in objects. On the contrary, when men are not satiated, and when their minds are afflicted with yearnings for one object after another, it is the very thirst itself that is the greatest pain, and this does not subside unless enjoyment follow. Furthermore, the full subsistence of this thirst is not permeated with the passion and similar states of mind. Thus it cannot be said that this subsistence has the painfulness of mutation. That is the point, because of their satiation. Means, because the thirst for enjoyment has dwindled, there is a subsidence of the organs. In other words, there is no activity of the organs with regard to the objects of sense. He makes the same clear by the negative instant in these words arising from craving. He rebukes an objection with the words, and by the organs not. The word because of, anu, is used in the sense of cause. It is true that the dwindling of thirst for objects is the flawless pleasure. But application to enjoyment is not the case of the dwelling of thirst, but is just the cause of the thirst, which is just the opposite of this dwelling of thirst. Just as they say, lust by the enjoyment, lust of lust never subsides. Just as by the butter oblation the flames flare up, yet once again. The rest is without obscurity. He asks a question with regard to the painfulness of anxiety in the words, now what? The answer is everyone. As everyone knows what it is, he does not make a detailed statement of it as such, and the detailed statement is analogous to that of the painfulness of mutation. He asks about the painfulness of sub-impressions by saying what? He gives the answer in the words, the experience of pleasure. For an experience of pleasure gives rise to subliminal impressions, and this to memory of pleasure, that is to passion, out of the movements of the central organ and of the body, and of the organ of speech, and of this he gives rise to merit and demerit. From these comes the experience of fruition, from this a subconscious impression. Thus, there is the beginningless chain. Here, the connexion should be understood in this way. There is a memory of pleasure and of pain according to the variation in the degrees of the subliminal impressions of the pleasure and pain, and from this comes passion and aversion. From these two come karma, and from the karma's fruition, streaming on the way, the stream of pain hinders the yogin only, but not the other perceiver, that is, any other ordinary person, as he says in the words, thus this, from time without beginning. But the triple anguishes sweep down upon the other. This is the construction of the sentence, insofar as the two anguishes, from that the gads and that of the elements, are each external. Their unity is emphasized. Sense is a fluctuation in the mind stuff. Undifferentiated consciousness, avidya, is said to be fluctuating mind stuff. And we see here that, whatever you call it, whatever you worship or decide not to worship, you can still call the process yoga. Of course, if you completely do away with the spiritual side, it's no longer yoga, but since it is a fluctuation in the mind stuff, undifferentiated consciousness, avidya, is said to be fluctuating mind stuff. Under the influence of this, with regard to these very things which are to be rejected, and that is, with regard to the thinking substance, and the organs of the body, and so on, as the I, and with regards to wife and children, the of me, he conforms himself to the I substance, and to the of me substance. This being the sense, there is no other refuge for him than the focused insight. So, dupadika, painfulness of the pleasure in objects, as a result of mutation out of subliminal impressions and of contact with anxiousness, he now indicates the intrinsic painfulness by saying, and by reason of the opposition of the aspects, guna. He explains this part of the sutra by saying, brightness and activity, and inertia are the forms, insofar as they are forms of the thinking substance, which enter into mutation. The aspects, guna, are sattva and rajas and tamas, and they are interdependent upon each other. They give rise to either tranquil, its essence is pleasure, or a cruel, its essence is pain, or finally, an infatuated, its essence is dejection. Presented idea of these three aspects, although its form is an experience of pleasure, and not even this mutation of this thinking substance, having such a presented idea in its form is fixed. Because of this, he says, and because the changes of the aspects, guna, are unstable, the mind stuff is in rapid mutation. It is objected. There is one presented idea. How can it at one time make known tranquility and cruelty and infatuation, which are opposed to each other. In reply to this, he says, the outer forms, when developed to a high degree, and the inner fluctuations, when developed to a high degree, oppose each other. The forms are the 8 states, Baba, beginning with right action. The fluctuations are pleasure and so on. So in this case, wrong action, since it is in such a condition of high development, is opposed by right action when it is in a process of fruition. Similarly with knowledge, and with passionlessness, and with power, as well as pleasure, and on corresponding contraries are in opposition, but the generic forms, which are not actively moving forth, since they do not oppose, those which are developed to a high degree cooperate with those which are actively moving on. The objector says, we know all this. Yet, how can pleasure in objects have an intrinsic painfulness? In reply to this, he says, thus sense these. Because the material cause of both is not different, and because their essence is the material cause, there is also no difference in the material effects. Apatheya. So then, is this identity absolute? If so, the difference between the two terms and the attributive relations of the thinking substance would not be possible. In reply to this, he says, in a subordinate or in a dominant. In relation to the generic element, Atman, there is subordination. In relation to the element which is developed to a high degree, there is dominance. So both extrinsically and intrinsically, svabhavatas, to the discriminating, all is nothing but pain. Consequently, by men of insight, pain should be escaped. Remember all those passages in the Quran of men, of humans of understanding? It cannot be escaped unless it's caused. Nidana he escaped. Moreover, it cannot be escaped unless its cause be thoroughly understood. So he shows what its radical cause is in the words, so of this, that seed out of which the aggregate of pain grows forth or arises. He shows the reason for extermination of the growth in the words, and in this. Now he shows that the system which has entered upon its activity for the sake of showing favor to all similar to another system of the same kind by saying, just as a system described as being 4 divisions is one of which there are 4 divisions, that is 4 completely arranged parts, it is objected, why is there not a contradiction when you say that pain is to be escaped, and when you now describe the round of rebirth as something to be escaped? In reply to this, he says, of these 4, with its mass of pains, that by doing which undifferentiated consciousness of Vidya makes the round of rebirth, that constitutes its special form of activity, which is the cause of the round of rebirths. Well, be reborn every day, right? This he describes in the words of the primary cause and effect of the self. He tells what liberation is in the words, of the correlation. He tells what the means of liberation are in the words, the means of escape. Some are who regard the extermination of him who escapes, Haughton, as he is in himself, to be liberation. Okay. In this sense, they say, like the blowing out, nirvana, of a lamp, is deliverance of this anguished tapan mind. Others, again, teach that as a result of the extermination of the hindrances, with their subconscious impressions, purified mental states, vijnana, are produced, and this itself is liberation. Round of rebirth is in being born and born again into hell, because incarnation is hell. This idea, so an afterlife where you're born and born to endure the punishments you deserve, doesn't have to mean reincarnation. Like the blowing out of nirvana of a lamp is the deliverer of the anguished tapan mind. Others, again, teach that as a result of the extermination of the hindrances with their subconscious impressions, purified mental states, vijnana, are produced, and that this itself is liberation. In reply to these, he says, in this focused insight. In this case, he first finds fault with the escape by saying, for if there be an escape for him, since no rational man ever exerts himself to exterminate himself, it is objected we see some persons, all of whose pleasures are uprooted by intense disease, and who drag about their bodies as if it were laden with pain, striving to exterminate themselves. Truly, he says in reply, there are a few such, but not of this kind are men living in the ordinary round of rebirth, for their lot is to enjoy diverse and strange and celestial delights. Even those and others, however, are evidently desirous of liberation. Accordingly, we should not concede that liberation is the extermination of him who escapes, as he is in himself, since that would involve what is not one of the aims of man. The objector says, very well then, let us say that he who escapes, as he is in himself, is something that may be accepted. In reply to this, he says, and if there be an acceptance, the doctrine that he has a cause. For if there be an acceptance of him, then because he would be impermanent insofar as he is an effort, he might also fall even from his state of liberation. For liberation is deathlessness, and we could not say that an uninterrupted succession of purified mental states is deathless, because the uninterrupted series over and above the members of the series, some tandan, not being anything perceptibly real, does not exist, and because the members in the series are not permeated, therefore we should strive to have such a theory as would teach that the self, as he is in himself, eternal. For thus being so, liberation, apavarga, might be one of the aims of man. For he says, and by denying birth, consequently liberation is nothing but the seer abiding in himself. Precisely, this is the right point of view. It's interesting to think of how certain cultures will talk about pleasure and favor and, some of these things all in the same term. This system is to be set forth in 4 divisions. 16. That which is to be escaped is pain yet to come. Pain past that is transferred beyond experience cannot properly be called pakse vartata, a thing to be escaped, and present pain in its own moment of existence has attained experience, so it cannot be at the next moment be so changed that it can be escaped. Consequently, only that pain which is yet to come and is that which hinders the yogin only, who is like an eyeball, but this does not hinder any other perceiver. Only this pain becomes so changed that it may be escaped. of this system is set forth in 4 divisions. 16. That which is to be escaped is pain yet to come. The words yet to come exclude the past and the present. He makes this consistent by saying pain past. If it is objected that a present pain now, an experience is not to be transferred beyond experience, he replies, and present, easy. Therefore the cause of this same thing that is described as something to be escaped is once more specified. 17. The correlation of the seer and the object of sight is the cause of that which is to be escaped. The seer is the self conscious by reflection of the thinking substance. Objects of sight are all external objects, dharma, which have been struck upon by the sattva of the thinking substance. This same object of sight, giving its aid, like a magnet, by the mere fact of being near, becomes, by reason of its being an object of sight, the property of the self, its proprietor, whose nature is seeing. It becomes changed into an object upon which experience operates, insofar as it has the nature of another. Having acquired this new being, although self-dependent, it becomes, by serving one not itself, dependent on one not itself. The correlation of these two, the power of seeing and the power by which one sees, is from time without beginning and is effective for 2 purposes. This correlation is the cause of that which is to be escaped, in other words, the cause of pain, and in this sense it has been said, by avoidance of the cause of correlation with this thinking substance, the antidote for pain would be absolute. Why would this be so? Because we know the antidote to prevent the cause of pain. For example, we know that the liability to scratches adheres in the sole of the foot. The power to scratch adheres in the thorn. The prevention of scratching is either by not stepping with the foot upon the thorn, or by stepping upon it when the sole of the foot is covered by a foot protector. Whoever understands these 3, scratch and causes and prevention, has begun the antidote. Therefore, and is not exposed to pain from scratches. And I'm going to close there for the moment, and namaste. I make mention of you.